So make sure we're okay. So we're recording, and then I'm going to start my iPhone here. Okay. I'm here with Claire Dickens, senior lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton, senior lecturer in nursing, and chair of the Wolverhampton Suicide Prevention Stakeholders Forum. And I'm Paul Clark, assistant professor at the University of Louisville School of Nursing. And we're going to talk a little bit about Claire's program that she and Guy Stewart have rolled out at the University of Wolverhampton called 3 Minutes to Save a Life and how it works. So Claire, why don't you discuss with us how does this work at your university?
So 3 Minutes to Save a Life was initially conceived as a safeguarding priority really at our university, whereby I was in a previous role prior to going into academia was as a mental health and wellbeing coordinator. So I very much had a strategic bird's eye view of the university and its needs. And we are a huge university spread across 4 campuses, some of them are 40 miles apart. So the idea of having this bolt-on provision of a mental health provision to say students go there was always possibly problematic. There was always potentially going to be a gap. So we had this idea of democratising suicide prevention, mental health and wellbeing, and giving everybody a role to play within our communities. So we set out a strategy to train all staff in the connecting with people approach, the training approach that we've adopted. So 3 modules that staff receive are suicide awareness, self-harm awareness, and we had to augment those principles because we can't consider one without the other, but also considering them separately. And then the finale to the day's training is the emotional resilience and resourcefulness for self. And I think no better way of eradicating the stigma around this topic to suggest that these thoughts can beset anyone at any point in their life. You do not have to be experiencing a mental illness to experience such distress that you consider your life is not worth living, but they absolutely do pass. We just need to figure out how we keep each other and ourselves safe until they do. Whilst we were conceiving this idea and we started working our way through that, we also conceived that as nurses, we were very, very aware that it wasn't a compulsory component of our training when we were in our undergraduate days. And society sends the message to people, particularly at the moment, to seek help. And I think it's not ridiculous to suggest that a lot of people believe that that's from formal mental health services. So we thought, well, how much of a nonsense is that really when people aren't trained or don't have the time, space and place within their curriculum to conceive what they can do to potentially tip somebody back to a point of safety. So we started to knead it into the curriculum for nurses, paramedics, our physiotherapist students and our pharmacy students at the university, despite the fact that it's still not a compulsory component based on the professional body stipulations. We believe that a life saved by suicide is no less valuable than any other preventable cause of death. So if CPR is a compulsory component, then so will suicide prevention. I think it's important to note that there isn't really any suicide awareness or prevention program that has said that, yes, because of that, this life has been saved, you know, but maybe that's too big a question to ask. It's part of a bigger picture, a bigger part of the equation, really. The fact that the rhetoric at the moment within mental health, particularly in the UK, I don't know if it's the same for yourselves, is just talk. Tell people how you're feeling. It's good to talk, but it rests far too heavily on the ability of the listener to hear with the view to understand, and not that the first response then is going to be one of shock, because what does that communicate potentially to that person if they've looked you in the eye and said, this is how I'm feeling, and then your first response is one of, I need to pass you on to somebody else. So it's about offering that earliest intervention that we possibly can. So to offer a summation, 3 Minutes to Save a Life is, it comprises in part of the training for mental health and connecting with people, the 3 modules, and whereby we conceive that when I first sat the training, I had that ontological shift moment, that penny drop to conceive that this isn't just about how I help other people. This is how I might potentially help myself. Every delegate is encouraged by the end of the day to consider what their own safety plan looks like. Even if you can hand on heart say, I've never conceived these thoughts before. We don't know what tomorrow brings, and suicidal thoughts don't have to commence with a plan or any desire to die. They can commence with the fleeting thought that my life is so difficult at the moment, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, it wouldn't be a big deal. That's the commencement of distress that we need to be concerned about, not panic, but we do need to recognise that early with the view to get ourselves or potentially somebody else the support that they actually need. Let's stop waiting for people to hit the 40-foot waves of their distress. Let's catch them much further upstream and ourselves.
Yeah. I'm loving that. I tell you what I really love is the fact that it is as important as CPR training, because CPR training is kind of ubiquitous, where our students are CPR trained before they start. Yeah. Would that we would have a similar type of training for them, because they'll probably encounter someone with suicide, probably even more so than someone who's stopped breathing or who's their heart has stopped. So I love that. I love that image. So tell me a little bit about the training that, and when you talk about delegate, we would probably refer them as students or faculty or staff. Is that kind of how you understand delegate? Okay. So tell us a little bit about the training for faculty, staff, and students.
I think in part, as I say, that the training for staff, we've been very mindful to not say it's compulsory, even though we would love for every staff member to have it, as part of their suite of training alongside information governance and all the other mandatory stuff. I think, never in the history of being told what to do we like being told what to do. So we're always very mindful with this kind of topic that we need to be very mindful of people's experiences that might not be in the right place. So it's the wrong thing almost to have a manager say, you must do this. But where we've been really fortunate, and I can't commend our staff at the university enough, that the training's almost spoken for itself and people want to sit it. So we haven't had any problems with people signing up to do it. So it's available once per month. In terms of the student nurses, we have large cohorts at our university. Nursing is it's an integral part of our Institute of Health. So we try our best to integrate the training into their induction. And it's far from a message to say that come to university to study nursing at some point you might feel suicidal, but we see it as that important in the fact that we need to get in there at the start, because we're very good, I think, at universities of saying this is going to be brilliant, it's an opportunity, but some of this journey might be tough. Life will chuck you curveballs, and certainly anecdotally I can say that we've had past students who've got in touch, or I've taught them on a postgraduate course, who've said, I remember sitting the training in my induction and it's tipped me back to a point of safety on many occasions when life was tough. So when my divorce was going through, or I was having problems with this XYZ, I remembered some of the sentiments. So and my safety plan, people called upon. So that's where we're at.
And you said there's 3 modules that each of so students, staff, and faculty would have 3 modules. Can you talk just a little bit about those modules? So
suicide awareness, what I really love about the Connecting with People approach is that it's based on all the latest evidence of what's working in terms of what's happening and what's beneficial in terms of suicide prevention. But what I probably like most about it is that it's heavily based on survivor story. And you very rarely hear that within the research that's dominated, dare I suggest, by a positivist viewpoint of one dominant truth. And I think when you listen to survivors such as Kevin Hines, Johnny Benjamin, other people who've been really generous in sharing their stories, they tell us a lot about the experience of surviving suicidal thoughts that we need to damn well listen to. The ambivalence of suicidal thoughts, the fact that they do pass, people do change their minds. What would have helped in that moment, what did help, that is very much needed into the design of the modules. So they're very much based on stories. What is particularly beneficial, I believe, about the modules is that people are afforded a permission to say what they think and they feel. about this topic. It's steeped in lots of understandings, lots of cultural ontological views of what it is, and none of them are right or wrong. But my job as a facilitator, as somebody who's there to actually take people on that journey, is to cause a little bit of dissonance, discomfort, and then piece you back together by the end of the day. Far to say that and that you're safer than you were before by the end of the day, in terms of the fact that you've gone on that journey. So we explore things such as the language that's used around the topic. We encourage people to consider what might prevent you from coming forward and saying, this is how I'm feeling. So it's an absolute honour, actually, as a facilitator, that people's honesty, people's generosity, and sometimes sharing some of their experiences. But what I probably most switched me onto the approach was Alice Cole King's continuum of suicidal thoughts. So one of the aims of the approach is to give each other a common language and level of understanding about what suicidal thoughts actually mean, because I might say I'm feeling suicidal to you, and it means something completely different to what it does to me. So there's the clinical element there as well, the fact that it may well aid successful triage. If I'm speaking the same language as the CPN who's on the crisis team phone call, we have a shared understanding about where this person's at, and that this just isn't a default referral that we're panicking and we're saying we've got one of yours. This person really needs some support. In a lot of cases, in my experience, very often people don't need the blues and twos response. They just need somebody to hear with the view to understand and potentially offer them some solution focus. So it's hoped at that community level that the training gives people the confidence to know that very often in that moment, just them listening and offering a commitment to help can be enough to tip back somebody back to a safer point on that watercourse. So the approach, another thing that we loved about it, is that it's heavily steeped in principles of compassion, of emotional intelligence, about how the brain ticks, about principles of humanity that make us more alike than unalike. It doesn't talk too heavily about mental illness or difference. It talks about how, as a species, as I say, we respond to distress in pretty much the same way physiologically, and that emotional pain and physical pain is very often what people are seeking an escape from, and they don't think that there is one. So the self-harm module very much is of the same ilk, really, of the same vein, that we offer people a time, a space and a place to reflect on their relationship with this particular topic. But also, I think one of my biggest bugbears about awareness training very often that I've sat is two things. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing and being told off, so I keep quiet. I don't really. Or that it does a very good job of raising my awareness. So it talks about prevalence and this, but then it leaves me there. It doesn't do anything to actually tell me what I can do now that my awareness is actually raised. So it does a little bit more than raising awareness of suicide. It goes beyond that and talks about safety planning, what people can do at a community level within their remit of competence. So what it's hoped with our nurse programme and our professional programs is that when you look at the evidence of what support people very often need in a professional context, peer-to-peer support comes out trumps every time. I'm doing conducting a literature review at the moment of support that's required of professionals post-suicides, and peer-to-peer support is a common strong theme that we value. So let's equip each other to be able to actually offer that. And as I say, the last module is related to emotional resilience and resourcefulness for self. Resilience is a word that's used in the UK at the moment, perhaps a little bit too heavily, without a common understanding of what it actually is. And it's not mental toughness. It's not the ability to not allow yourself to be overwhelmed by something. For us, it's about the ability to bounce back quite quickly and nurture strengths that might shield you in sudden adversity again. But the resourcefulness element comes into the fore in the fact that there are some problems I might face in my life that I need support for. So why not preemptively consider that in terms of where to get that support from and increase your toolkit? So we get delegates by the end of the day to conceive their own safety plan, but also to make some promises to themselves of what they will start to do, what they will continue to do, and what they will stop doing, because they've reflected by the end of the day that, you know, that's not good for my well-being. And it could be very, very simple principles like an inability to say no to people. You know, I'm always saying yes, and my real yeses don't mean yes anymore. We've had lots of things come through like that. So little subtle changes that can make all the masses of difference to build resilience and build well-being into the programme. So that's the programme in its entirety.
Awesome. So what I find exciting, one of the aspects that I find exciting about your program is that it's something that people can be trained on. So you do training. The 3 modules we referred to are actually administered by a second organization for mental health there in the United Kingdom. Those 3 modules, trainers are trained, then they can come in and actually train the trainers within the university, right? So separate from training staff on suicide prevention and having a safety plan, discuss a little bit about the train the trainer piece. How does that work at your university?
So how I managed it at the university was I was quite deliberately strategic at the start, insofar as, you know, we went to, I mean, I'd had a relationship with Alice Colkin before starting working at the university, because I was delivering this training in an NHS trust to staff. And if I'm honest, after sitting the training myself, I couldn't see the subject, and I'd been studying it for a long, you know, a good many years. I couldn't see or practice the way that I had done before, in a positive way. So I certainly knew the subjective power of the training in terms of how it had affected me. So, but it was the first time really that this approach was brought to a community level, out of a clinical context. And it's taken on really its own life form there. And it's not to say it's better than other training, it's just it fitted for us. That's how it is. So I initially asked for connecting with people to come in and deliver the training to 24 people who I'd picked quite deliberately. 8 of them who, as part of our agreement, were going to go on to be train the trainers, but then the others were anyone from quite senior level individuals within the organisation to our accommodation manager. So there was that sharing of experience within that first session for those 24. Then, as I say, the 8 train the trainers went on then to we considered how we'd actually deliver this out. To me, it makes it more sustainable. Even though there are key messages and there are key things that you need to stick to within the modules to make them meaningful, you know your community, your students, your university better than anybody else will do. So I think that what's beneficial about the train the trainer arrangement is sustainability, cost effectiveness. You can manage your schedule into, if you want to put a session on every week, you can. If you want to do it once a month, you can. You haven't got to wait for other people's availability per se. But there's that indigenous seasoning that you can sprinkle in to the approach that nobody else is going to get. Nobody else is going to understand. So that's how it worked at our university. So that's where we're at.
Fabulous, which I think is helpful because people that initially get the training can then, as you said, bring it into a university and train on a schedule that's much more convenient, or it's easier to roll out that training based on the university schedule. So I really like that piece. And can you talk a little bit about the costs of the program? Are there costs involved with the initial training from For Mental Health? And then are there additional costs as far as maintaining the training and doing continuing education at the university once you're training the trainers?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a financial cost. Obviously, there's the licensing element and the time that goes into the development of the modules, the bringing together of peers and all the rest of it. So there is an initial cost, and then thereafter yearly there is a licensing update, and part of that is that then as train the trainers, as people who are trained, you get updates on what I mean, you've got access to the web page as well, where there's and emails are coming in galore in terms of what the new evidence is saying, and we're having discussions about that. So not to sound contrite, but you do feel part of another professional group, of another family in that sense. So you've got stuff hot off the heels really in terms of evidence that you can then adapt. You don't have to wait for your yearly update to start putting the new evidence into the training, you can be doing it as quick as you actually receive it. But from a quality, a consistency and a quality, a governance point of view, from full mental health point of view, that every year that licensing one gives you permission as a university or whoever to carry on rolling out that in their name, but arguably it's to make sure that the message remains safe and that the facilitators remain safe and they're not veering off. So every session is evaluated by the delegates, the students, and there's Likard scale evaluation, but there's also some qualitative space within the evaluation. And when you upload that into the full mental health web page, which is what they've got, arguably, you've got a pool of data there that you could probably get some papers out if you so pleased. But I always read those evaluations after every session just to make sure people are okay. Just to make sure people are okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing from you is that there's fees to initially train at the 3 modules on 4 mental health, and then you can bring that training into the university, train trainers.
Yeah.
There's some licensing fees that 4 mental health charges so that you can continue to train trainers and also access their website, their continuing education, which they require people to be do some continuing education and updating every year. And also, I think one of the key parts that you mentioned was that you can roll out new data. You're following the 4 mental health model, but you can roll out new training in your modules and not wait for their updates, which I think it's immediately bringing the evidence into the training, right?
The evidence, isn't it? I think that's one of the services, if you like, what you're getting from full mental health as well, is that they're arguably, that they're committed to this full time in terms. I'm passionate about suicide prevention. It's something that I eat, sleep and breathe, but I do have a day job as well. I do have other modules to teach on. So they're kind of doing that hard work insofar as that when they get papers come through that you might not have access to, when they get some knowledge come through in terms of what's happening in the world or whatever it be, that's then being fed through, so you can feed that into the training without waiting for that yearly update that you get for your licensing. So yeah. Nice.
How do you work the training into your students' schedule? Because as you noted, you're not just the person that's doing suicide prevention. You have a whole mental health curriculum that you're responsible for. So, and then you're not the only professor, right? You're not the only instructor, teacher.
Not yet. Don't wish that on me.
So how do you get that training to students that are already, they're pretty burdened with the amount of education that they've got, to get before their licensure exam? So where do you work it in your program?
I'm really fortunate insofar as that what we have every year for every cohort, because we have cohorts too. We have 2 intakes of nursing students a year, and in the majority of cases, and I say the majority because we have 3 campuses of 2 intakes. So arguably, well, 4 now actually. So as far as is reasonably practicable, I tend to get in at the induction stage where we've got a 2-week schedule of, here are your modules for the first year. Here is the orientation to the university, and in the majority of cases, it's probably the first bit of formal teaching that those students receive. So yeah, and it's memorable. It's memorable in that way. When we're not almost playing catch up, but sometimes you do have to play catch up with some cohorts. So you find you weigh in, and very often there are students speak to each other. We need to be very aware of that. Or we had this training, so we haven't had that. So students in their own voice are coming forward and saying, well, where's our snip of this? It's been really unfortunate with the COVID situation that we're not performing any face-to-face teaching at the moment. And the new cohort that came in March, I've had one student tweet me to say, well, what about 3 minutes? I've been told about this. I've been eager to sit it. Can we have it? And that's where I'd argue that there is a lot of online delivery being planned around any number of the topics. And I would fall on my sword for this one to say that it needs to be delivered face-to-face. You need that safe time, space and place. Because the safety of delegates, the safety of students is incredibly important. So we tend to be in pairs, whereby one person will be delivering, will be speaking, will be facilitating discussion, and you'll have somebody else keeping a weather eye on absolutely everybody there to make sure if they're becoming overwhelmed, people do have the permission to leave if they need to, but we'll follow them. So we do have a little bit of a running joke that if it's just the toilet that you need, just put your hand up, because we will follow you there as well. And we're not embarrassed, we're nurses. But the safety of you need to be very, very careful with a subject such as this. The fact that we don't know the experience of people coming into the room. We don't know what trauma they might be carrying. And although it's not our intention to upset people, we may do through the eloquence of what we're discussing. And for some people, that movement, that emotional movement, is a good thing. But we don't want to leave people unsafe through the process of engaging in this training. Hence, we finish off the day with focusing in on them, reflecting on their well-being, making plans for the future, looking at a safety plan, a well-being plan, all those things to kind of just sew it up nicely and piece them back together. But as I say, online, I would be hesitant. Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're saying is, as much as we want to push things online, especially because we have students that aren't even co-located physically in our university, having the face-to-face provides the students a safe environment which they can receive the training, maybe start to look at some of their own issues, and then if they become overwhelmed and need to leave, they've got a safety net in that there's a faculty who's teaching that could follow them out just to ensure they're okay, refer them if need be. But that's the benefit of doing this in person, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
I think there are some topics, Paul, forgive me, but that you just can't deliver. And this, for me, in the amount of, I mean, if it were just a simple awareness that, you know, these are the statistics, this is the basic of what you can offer, then fair enough. And we've got programs like that here in the UK with the Zero Suicide Alliance training, etc., etc., and that's fantastic. I certainly don't knock any of them, but for this particular approach, in my view, because of the nature of it, it's very facilitative. It's not chalk and talk. You can't replicate that online. And I think from the safety point of view, yeah. Good,
fabulous. Okay. And I completely appreciate that. I understand the value of online. I'm much better in person. And
I'm really missing students. It's not
right. Yeah, exactly. With this whole COVID and social distancing, especially at our university environments right now. Just briefly, I want to bring up on the screen the article that you and your co-author, Guy Stewart, put together, because I want to emphasize that this is a evidence-based program. So while I'm bringing that document up, can you just speak to the fact that this is evidence-based? This is, I want to bring in the anecdotal stories about how people have described to you, students and staff, how this has affected them, but I also want to get at this is evidence-based. This is an evidence-based program.
I think what needs to be reiterated about the Connecting is that there aren't any training programs from an evidence-based point of view that says because of this suicide is reduced, but you could argue the same in terms of public places of concern. When we put safety measures in there, we'll never be able to prove that because of that barrier at the bridge, you know, people didn't die from there. But so this paper was more a positioning paper in that sense, to really let people know within our discipline what we were doing within our university. So it certainly wasn't research. I've got to reiterate that for the benefit of transparency. It certainly wasn't. It was more so to tell people, to tell the audience of what we were doing, just to make them aware of it. It's almost like this is what we're doing and this is what we're possibly going to do with it. So it talks about the approach. It talks about why we went for it, really, in terms of the fact that it was very compassion based, and it was based on the stories, the living experience of those survivors who very often get excluded within the literature. And I think for nurses, compassion is one of those things that's almost a compulsory expectation of us as part of our professional and personal identity. And I think one of the problems that we all share within Connecting with People for Mental Health, and Stuart felt, was the fact that very often people don't recognise how difficult it is to be compassionate all the time. It's a really difficult thing to do, and nor should it be an expectation of an inexhaustible resource. And for us to go forward and truly be able to actually tolerate the pain of others and support them, we need to be able to tolerate our own. We need to be able to tolerate our own and know how to look after ourselves. It's a major concern of mine. In the UK, from a demographic point of view, female nurses are one of the highest risk demographics of dying by suicide. So I have colleagues, peers who are surrounded by help, should be, who are dying as a result of suicide, and I'm not prepared to really just sit by idly and allow that to continue to happen without trying to contribute something towards that. But 3 Minutes to Save a Life was predominantly focused in on the areas of strategy, the early days of the strategy back in 2015, whereby we initially commenced rolling out the programme. So we were talking about our experiences of what we noticed as a result of that. So particularly within accommodation services, who really gave me the inspiration that this programme could work. They said, we really want to help students, Claire. We're desperate to help students. We're just absolutely petrified of saying the wrong thing. Yeah. So I always thought, maybe foolishly, that there wouldn't be a will from people whose job it wasn't to respond to distress, but there is, and humanity is that binding force. But people, when it comes to this topic, are absolutely petrified of saying the wrong thing. Well, it's of no surprise to many possibly that professionals carry that same worry. They're scared of saying the wrong thing. So when it comes to this topic, I think much of the stigma that exists around suicide isn't considered a stigma, but it's considered common knowledge, therefore truth. So there's nothing you can really do to stop somebody if that's what they really want to do. If somebody really wanted to do it by now, they'd have done it anyway. So it's all those things that provide a barrier from you hearing that person's distress, because you're starting from a cognitive back foot of there's nothing I can do to help them anyway. Nothing I can do to help them anyway. So yeah, so that was what that paper was really about, really, in terms of a positioning paper, in terms of telling people what's what. But I think to reiterate, in terms of the fact that the approach is based on all the evidence of what is working, so an accumulation of worldwide research. I mean, Professor Nicholas Proctor at the University of South Australia is someone's work to follow, who've also adopted the Connecting with People approach. And back in 2017, I think it was, Dr. Monica Ferguson, who teaches at the University of South Australia, came over to the UK, and she spent a couple of days in Wolverhampton. And what I found fascinating was the fact that it wasn't deliberate. We were due to actually deliver 3 minutes to staff. And Monica said to me, shall I help you out? We had no prior practice. We hadn't delivered this together before, and it was as if we'd been doing it together for years. It was that natural. And I think that's what the approach really does, because it's structured, it's time phased, it's succinct, and it's designed predominantly with practitioners in mind, that very often they haven't got a whole 2-3 days to give you out of their schedule to look at one subject. So it's certainly taken on a form with GPs in the UK, who like the fact that it's short, sharp, impactful, but gives them something to go away with and be able to actually implement within their practices straight away. So yeah, that's where we're at.
And thank you. And it occurred to me, I don't know, I want to ask, when you deliver the training to students, how long is it? An 8-hour day? Is it like 2 hours over 3 days? What's the time connection there for them?
I mean, the modules are 2 hours each. Okay, so arguably, and then with a lunch break within that, with a comfort break within that. But I've certainly learned within my teaching experience to allow students to be producers. So they tell me when they want to break. So I won't say, right, we're going to break at 10, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But arguably, we do conceive the fact that there are certain points within the modules where you know that it's potentially going to require people to reflect on it for 5-10 minutes. So that usually, I've developed an awareness of the approach now, the fact that there are cues within the schedule of the modules whereby people will need a head wobble moment and just a comfort break. So yeah, I usually schedule it from about 9 for people to get comfortable, but then to start between 15:15 and 4:30, and then we're usually done with the 3 modules by 4:30. Okay. And that's so, lunch break.
So basically a full day. Yeah, you know, when you get throw in lunch breaks and some
absolutely.
Rest breaks.
I mean, I've had experience of delivering these modules separately. whereby people take a pick and mix approach. So they do suicide awareness, and then they might not do self-harm awareness until a year after, because it's when they can next do it. So there is that way of doing it if you wanted to do it, in terms of splitting it up. But in my experience, and it's mine, I think there's a benefit in taking people on that journey over a day, where you ask them, don't look at your emails. This time is for you, and arguably we're going to hopefully piece you back together by the end of the day. So that's been my experience. It's better, in my view, to deliver those three modules together.
Yeah, fabulous. And while you were talking, I put 4Mental Health's website up just so our viewers could see the website, and then how to get to the training modules, so they could kind of get an idea of the training modules that are not only available, but the ones that specifically you use.
I think it's worth letting people know about stayingsafe.net. So it's a resource that you can already start signposting students to. It's a resource that you can, I would hope you would use yourself if ever you needed to. And when it was originally conceived by Alice Colking, it was kind of to fill that gap for people who, despite the rhetoric telling them to talk and seek help, they just might not have the energy to. They might not want to. They might prefer another way of actually coping. So the stayingsafe.net is a resource whereby people can hear out videos, watch videos of people conducting their own safety plan, co-producing their own safety plan. And I analogize safety plans as breakdown cover for your car. So whenever I'm delivering it to conferences, I always ask people, in the audience, who's got a car? People will put their hands up, and then I'll ask them, well, of those who've got cars, how many of you have got breakdown cover for it? And people put their hands up. Then I ask people, how many of you have got breakdown cover for your mental health? And most hands go down. And it's that notion of not hoping it happens, but conceiving that life can chuck us curveballs. Every human being on this planet has a breaking point, chuck enough pressure at us and life events, and maybe not enough support, not enough resources, all the rest of it, or that there's too much toxicity within our workplace, or whatever it be, or our families. We will hit our breaking points. But it's ridiculous, isn't it, that the majority of us have considered how we get home safe if our cars break down, but not if our distress starts to hit a breaking point. So that's what we always advocate, preempted safety planning, and that's what the approach, the training package gives permission for, really.
Yeah.
If that nurse or student nurse then has to help somebody else develop their own safety plan because they've already got their own, what better way of breaking down stigma around this topic? Right,
exactly. And I pulled up I clicked on create a safety plan, and because you can actually fill out, people can, when they click on that, can actually fill out their own. And then part of my safety plan came up because I had saved it on there. So that was part of what was on that screen share there. And finally, and Claire, I really appreciate both your work, you and Stuart Guy, and I think I misidentified him, but Stuart Guy is your co-author, co-worker. Your work in this area, because I think, and I want to lead into this next section with this comment, is I think we initially understood suicide as a sin, and then that part of it went away, and then it became a criminal act. It was a criminal act, something, it was a murder of a self, and then we've kind of reduced that stigma, and it's become a mental health issue. And even the mental health, labeling that as a mental health issue itself is not helpful. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and perhaps maybe if you could move us forward in this whole evolution of figuring out how to prevent. If this were cancer, we'd be looking for cancer drugs, or we'd be looking for holistic diets or things to help lower cancer risk. As a person working in this area, how would you treat this problem similarly? How can we move forward? What are the next steps in stopping people from being haunted by suicide and making suicide attempts?
I think you're right in that summation that you've offered, because we were discussing this before we started recording, that in my view of the topic, and I've been studying it for, a good many years, the fact that we've taken this issue from being a product of sin to one of mental illness. And I'm not saying that for some people who choose to identify to have a mental illness, that isn't helpful for them, that the support that they can get for such mental illness, but it won't fit everybody. For some members of our community, for some members within our society, this construct, the language of mental illness, just doesn't exist. Distress does, and that's what I like about this approach, the fact that there's an accessibility for all members of the community, because we strip back and we don't focus in on one way of understanding this distress. It's about how, you know, just at a common level of compassion-based principle. But I suppose that maybe this idea of it, you know, suicidal thoughts being a construct of mental illness has been problematic. And that certainly comes through within the literature, and maybe has posed a barrier for people coming forward and saying, this is how I'm feeling. Because although we've made great waves in reducing the stigma around mental ill health and seeking help, the stigma around suicidal thoughts is different. It's very often, there's another layer of stigma, I think, that exists around that. And it's about the ability of the hearer as well, in terms of knowing that they can make a difference, that the response to suicide isn't the preserve of mental health services. Everybody has a role to play in our societies to support ourselves predominantly, and that's not selfish, that's sustainable, and others. So that is my dream, and that's something that I certainly drives me to do the work that I do in Wolverhampton, is the fact that my kids are growing up here. You've probably seen a couple of them walk up and down the stairs and carry on as normal, but you know, anywhere where they may need to go in my home city, where they may need support, I want their barber, a taxi driver, a school teacher, a university lecturer to have the same level of confidence to look them in the eye and say, how can I help you? And genuinely mean it, because it might save their life. And I'm fortunate, but then again not in other ways, the fact that I've met so many bereaved parents who are haunted by if onlys. So we've got to stop blaming each other when things go wrong. There are always lessons to be learnt, always time to reflect. And the evidence here in the UK, led by Louis Appleby's team, is telling us that when we get together as those bereaved and affected and bring family members involved in those lesson learning, the fact that we can really make some headway. So not stop looking for each other to blame, and don't blame the person either. But certainly we don't have the right to tell people how to grieve either. So suicide prevention should always be viewed in the trying to prevent suicide, but also not neglecting the postvention. So although suicide shouldn't be conceived as inevitable, we have to consider that despite our best efforts, despite support, some people may still go on to die by suicide. What can we learn as a result of that together as a community, with a view to prevent further deaths? So yeah,
fabulous. Well, I have got my questions. I think we've gone through those, and I've learned so much just listening to you share your perspective and your knowledge. So I want to thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go? Is there anything in addition?
You're probably going to regret saying that, Paul, because I could be here for the next 2 hours. You know, Zoom meetings with me that have lasted longer than this. But no. As I say, I think it's one of those things that be aware of your contribution that you can make to this agenda. It could be, you know, one random act of kindness that could be enough to tip somebody back to a point of safety. I know with social distancing at the moment, all the rest of it, but human beings are inevitably designed to connect. We're not very good on our own. We're rubbish actually. But it's that connection and our need to connect and belong to groups that can sometimes be a curse, but very often is the thing that has us get our heads together and agree on a problem to fix it. So if that's where you're at on this particular agenda, when you're looking at your population of student nurses, then you're already halfway there, in my view. The fact that, as I say, arguably you're getting your heads together, you've agreed on a problem, and you're trying to look for a solution that fits you. No one can dictate that any one particular training package is better than the other, but hear the experiences of others in terms of who've maybe had some years behind them of doing this, and consider what fits, and go for it. Because if I always started out with this approach, because you might have gathered I'm certainly not a positivist, a quantitative mindset of statistics, but if it saves one person's life, then it's worth it. Everybody's life is valuable, not financially valuable, but yeah, it's valuable. So if it saved one person's life, then it's worth doing. anecdotally, I've certainly had that feedback from individuals who said it tipped me back to a point of safety. So yeah, you can't buy that. You can't buy that. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Claire Dickens, who's programmed along with Guy Stewart, or Stuart Guy, 3 minutes to save a life. I really appreciate your time. Claire is a senior lecturer in mental health nursing at the University of Wolverhampton, and also the chair of the Wolverhampton Suicide Prevention Stakeholder Forum. That's a state level, not a university level, but it's a governmental level forum there.
City level. Don't promote me too heavily. At city level.
City level. Absolutely, and thank you for that clarification. But I just want to thank you very much for your time. So I'm going to end the recording here. I'm not going to hang up, but I'm going to end the recording. So let's see, how do I stop this?
No, I can't.